Good morning, everybody. My name is Ken May, and I'm with the team here at CIO Solutions. I'm our AI and cybersecurity consultant, and looking forward to presenting to you guys today on a very important topic, and that is talking about practical security. Now, I love to do these webinars in a very interactive format, so if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, please don't hesitate. Feel free to, there's no chat, but I think you can still do the raise hand button, and we'll see. And I can unmute you or whatever. And I will happily answer whatever questions you might have. Um, I often find that if one person has a question, then probably, at least three, four, five other people have the question as well. And you're just the brave one. So feel free to be brave. You guys can all see my slides okay, I think, right? Eric, the
Yep,
slides showing up okay?
you're looking good, Ken.
All righty. All right, so what we're going to be talking about is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. NIST, or NIST, is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's a public-private organization that works very closely, not just with our government, but with a lot of the top institutions in the country, mostly educational institutions, but they've got some scientists that are from all sides of the spectrum. And they build out a lot of different standards for technology. So we're going to talk a bit about why we are going with them and why that's important. So you're a business and you don't have necessarily any specific compliance regulations, requirements, or anything like that. You're not bound by HIPAA because you don't do anything with private healthcare information. You don't you aren't bound to CMMC because you're not a DoD contractor or subcontractor. Maybe you don't directly deal with payment card information, so you're not bound by PCI. So why do we care about any kind of a compliance framework, specifically this one here? Well, there's a few different types of organizations that are really ideal choices to be thinking about mapping themselves to a compliance framework anyway. So if you recognize yourself somewhere on this slide, stay tuned here. Looks like I need to tweak some of the font size a little bit. All right, that'll be version 2 of this slide. So you're not in a regulated industry, so you don't have all these compliance regulations hanging over your head, but you still want real security. You want something objective. You want something standardized that you can hold up to and say, yeah, we're following best practices here. Another class of customer is they're finding themselves facing a lot of very increasingly complex questions from all sides about their technology and about what they are doing in order to protect themselves. So cyber liability insurance, or even just regular liability insurance applications, are now asking, Eric, I don't know what you've seen, but I've seen it as much as 20-page questionnaires about asking cybersecurity questions, and they're
The
giving it
depth,
to, what's
the
that?
depth, the depth and breadth of the questions are harder, and so both levels, the number of questions, the depth, and then more and more there's real consequences for fudging the numbers, so to speak, which was a heavy practice 10 years ago for sure.
Absolutely, and of course, these are often being given to C-suite folks, and it's all Greek to them, right? So it gets passed along to their IT folks that have to take a look at it and say, like, well, yeah, this would be a good idea, but it never came up in conversation before. Um, so they don't have a particularly strong answer for the questionnaire. The last category here would be for a class of client, personally my favorite class here, which is a client that is ready to increase their operational maturity. They want a roadmap. They want to be able to take a look at their current environment and say, here's where we are. Here's the ideal situation where we would be best practices, right? And what do we need to do to get from here to there? Um, it may be wants versus needs, but it's going to be something objective either way. All right.
Ken, I'll just comment, if you go to that last class, the Ready Mature, kind of a sub class or within this is the consulting world has long been hey, you're on product X, go to product X plus, and that keeps you more secure. And it's true. But I think there's a lot of clients that want to know, well, what are all the things I can do, and how do I direct any funding to the thing that reduces the most risk? And so they're looking for this holistic roadmap so that they can choose where to direct funds for as they mature, rather than just say, what makes me more secure? Here's one item. They want to be more holistic and more deliberate in their approach to maturing.
That's a perfect addendum there, and that I think also wonderfully illustrates the difference between when you have engineers answering questions versus when you have someone at a C-suite ownership level who understands the business impact that can add thoughts as well. So thank you very much, Eric. Absolutely, 100%. So right now, there is no set of standards that is being required at the national level for businesses. But we are under incredibly increasing uh, scrutiny and pressure to be able to meet a lot of the same requirements and needs as some of these other ones are. And the writing is on the wall. There has already been a push from previous White House administrations to move in the direction of starting to have something that would look like a national cybersecurity standard. Um, we don't know exactly what that would look like just yet, but there's a very strong chance that it would likely be coming from something like NIST as a baseline anyway. And it makes sense, right? Um, right now, the cyber liability world is a very different world than it once was 5, 10 years ago, where they were basically writing out cyber liability addendums just as riders on your existing agreements for a pittance. Well, then they started actually having to pay out on them. And so now there's a lot more scrutiny by the insurance companies. They're asking 70 to 100 plus control questions. You can't simply put down, check a box. Yep, we got a firewall. Or in the past, even you might be able to mark down no on a lot of them, and there'd be no follow up. The insurance broker who is giving you the questionnaire didn't really know necessarily how to interpret it anyway, so it was kind of a moot point. But they've become a lot smarter because they realize that they're actually having to pay out a lot of these. And right now, the vast majority, let me turn my pointer on here. There we go, my laser pointer. The vast majority of vendor questionnaires are including not just generalized IT questions, but explicitly cybersecurity questions for any sort of contract signature, even for any kind of vendor agreements. Um, Supply chain compromise is a big concern, particularly where the government is concerned. But even in the private sector, a lot of businesses are feeling that pressure. So we, as businesses, should be doing our due diligence whenever we sign an agreement with any of our vendors. If we're going to give them access into any aspect of our systems, we need to make sure that they're following best practices as well. Do you guys remember some years back Target got hacked and it was a pretty big deal? You guys remember that? Well, the reason they got hacked was because their HVAC, their heating, venting, and air conditioning vendor, had accidentally left a back door open in one of their tools, and hackers were able to find that and break into their systems and compromise everything. So if we were holding folks to best practices, something like that likely would have gotten identified ahead of time as being an issue. Um, and the cost for ransomware is increasing. And the concerning part as well is once upon a time, it made a lot more sense for hackers to focus on attacking the very large businesses because that's where the money was, right? But now they're doing a bit more of a spray and pray method where they are blasting out ransomware attacks to all sizes of businesses. And even for the smallest of the businesses, their average cost of a ransomware hit is over $250,000, and that's just the numbers that are self-reported. Eric, have you ever had any experience either through peer group or from stories you've heard of folks paying similar sorts of amounts to recover?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have even a whole industry that I think is fascinating called ransomware brokers, and their goal is to customers that have no other choice but to pay the ransom to broker the deal, reduce the price. They have a database of what the ransom people will actually accept, and then they take a cut of what they've reduced the price for, which seems like it should be criminal, but it's an actual industry. So yeah, we've seen all sorts of both having to pay ransom or just doing your due diligence to prove what did or didn't happen forensically. So all of those things add up into fees, not to mention downtime. You know, the more regulated you are, the more you have to be careful as you come back up to make
Mm.
sure you're preserving data and knowing how you can access it. So there's a ton of costs, not just the downtime, which is obvious, or the reputation risk, but other costs that just simply add up in the IT space, depending on how you handle the incident. And the expectation of businesses is more that you will handle it as an incident. It spins off and forks off into a separate process. We haven't seen that hit a lot of the small businesses, but it's starting to be required. You know, the insurance companies are asking for incident response plans and how you'll handle it. So yeah, this stuff is starting to bleed in, and there's lots of cost components to it outside of the obvious.
Well, especially what you mentioned, the reputation management. That's an incredibly important part that gets very, very often overlooked, and that can be incredibly expensive as well. Um, this reminds me, in my previous incarnation, when I was at another MSP years and years ago, we ran into something that I think illustrates this, pretty importantly. And it was a regional manufacturer, a hardware manufacturer. There were around maybe 80 employees, something like that, and they didn't have any specific regulatory compliance obligations, but they thought they were going to get maybe a 10 or 15% hit from their insurance company, and it wound up being a 4x boost. And they came back with just all these questions they'd never dealt with before. So being able to answer these questions correctly and adequately can sometimes help save you quite a bit of money. So one of the traps we see a lot is businesses sometimes are operating under the mindset you don't need compliance. We're not bound to any compliance. It's just an additional cost. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. But I like to call that the complacency trap. So the problem there is you're banking on not knowing what you don't know. And that can be very, very difficult. And if you haven't been breached, if you haven't had an attack, then you can be lulled into this sense of peace. So sometimes what those identifying items look like for individual businesses might be security is just something that one person is doing here and there. It's not their full-time job. It's not their full-time focus. It's being done kind of just as needed. The tools that they have been picked in order to be able to help maintain and run the company, they were chosen maybe because of cost, maybe because somebody said, well, we need a tool to be able to do this, so let's just find one, as opposed to part of some holistic strategy. If you were asked on the spot, hey, can you generate a list of every single piece of software, every single piece of hardware in our company, most businesses wouldn't be able to do that. They feel at peace because they know that they've got backups, but they're not regularly testing the restoration. In fact, years ago, had a client that this was long, long, long past when tape backups were common, but for some reason they were still doing that. This was like only maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the receptionist spent 20 minutes every day swapping out backup tapes, waiting for it to eject and to load and all that sort of stuff. And because they didn't have any sort of process in place to actually do restoration verification, turns out almost a year prior, the backup system had failed and she just didn't know what the little red light on the front of the thing meant. So she spent a year backing up blank tapes. So that's fun. And of course, the only metric that a lot of these folks are thinking of is like, well, we've never been hit, so we're doing it right. So there's already a framework that you're being judged against by vendors, by insurers, by auditors, customers, and they're not telling you all the things that they're seeing that you're not doing. They're not telling you when they want to log into one of your systems, like, well, how come there's no option for MFA? That seems like that's something that would be important. So why do we pick the NIST framework? Why do we have a framework at all? The cybersecurity framework is a great framework for our clients because it's general, it's broad, and it's not industry specific. It's comprehensive without beating all the individual minutia into you with a stick, and it's written in plain English. It's designed for small to mid-sized businesses. So it gives us a menu of outcomes, what good cybersecurity is looking like, and it's scalable. This is something that works for a 25-person team, and it works for a 2,500 person company just as well. And it's continually being updated by some of the best minds in the industry. Just in 2024, it updated again to version 2.0, and they're already working on version 2.1 or 3.0 is whatever the next one they're working on. And it's used by many, 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 many different organizations. It's open, so anybody can go and take a look at not just the framework itself, but you can even take a look at some of the papers that led to how it was developed, which I think is very, very useful. So what is it and what is it not? It's not the same as HIPAA, CMMC, or PCI. It's a regulation that is going to be agnostic to the industry you're in. So it's best practices regardless of the specifics that might be called into play by some of those, deeper industries. It's not a regulation you're going to get fined for missing. This is completely voluntary. So you don't have to do everything that the framework calls for. You can take a look at it strategically and see what is going to fit your needs best. It's not necessarily a certification that you get from a third party or from the government that they're going to take a look at it and be like, you failed this. But it's more of a structure to help guide you on your operational maturity as your business continues to grow. And look, realistically, the vast majority of businesses out there grew organically. They added things on bits and pieces, and there comes various different pain points where they realize they need to formalize and start building out processes and do things a little bit more formally. Eric, I'm sure you see this quite a bit. One of the reasons I think clients come to us at CIO Solutions is they realize they've hit one of those points in their journey, and somebody's cousin and their best friend handling their IT just isn't going to cut anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a range of reasons from the sophistication, the growing domains of knowledge it takes to run the technology of a given company, and making sure you're doing all the things in the past that you needed to do and adding on the new things that come up every year. And security is just yet another thing. So yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another nice thing about this framework is that it doesn't specify what specific products you need to use. This isn't a vendor-led thing that says, oh, you have to use Cisco or oh, you have to use Google. But it maps based off of the needs of the organization according to what the best practices are for whatever the tool or hardware solution might be. So it's not audited by NIST at all. There's no NIST audit. This is just a signal you take security seriously, something that you can hand over to your customers, to your vendors, you can mention on your website. We believe that security is such a strong part of what we do that we have voluntarily mapped ourselves to this compliance framework.
Ken, there is an actual document that you can share with prospective customers that are asking you, hey, how are you secure? So there is some evidentiary information that you can elect to use to show, potential business relationships or vendors that you're taking it seriously as well, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can, if you want to, I haven't run across that very often unless it's already being asked for by a vendor or by like an insurance company. But 100%, you can show them a matrix that shows, how you've mapped to everything, um, and um, and lay that out. Absolutely. So, what does this look like? Well, there's 6 different domains that cover just about every aspect of cybersecurity for a business. So we have the primary domain here, govern, and then we break it out into separate sections: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And this follows sort of the workflow of the best practices for the incident response cycle, right? Ideally, we want to make sure that we are identifying things and understanding what's happening in our company. We want to prevent them from being able to happen. If they happen, we want to know about them. If we know about them, we want to know how to respond to them, and then obviously recover ourselves. But this is an ongoing cycle, so it's not a static thing. The govern domain here that got added to the other original domains here is because they realized they needed all kind of a meta domain that informed all the other ones on how to be configured and how to be deployed. So going into each of the individual sections functions here, govern is the strategy, it's the roles, it's the oversight, so it binds all the different pieces together. The main outcomes from this domain is we want to make sure that cybersecurity risk is identified as an actual business risk itself, not just an IT issue. It's not just an alert that comes in that IT has to deal with. It could potentially have much deeper uh, implications for the company. We want to make sure that all the different roles, the responsibilities, and the authorities that are handling cybersecurity and IT are defined, documented, known. Because if multiple people share responsibilities or no people responsibilities, then nobody's responsible, right? The policies themselves are going to set the direction for how all the other phases deploy, and communication with leadership is absolutely critical. If folks are here from the C-suite of their organization, which I really hope there are some, um, this is going to be something that you will occasionally have to spend a little time on. At the very least, being in the loop, being informed of what's happening, because it's that critical to the organization. It does need management buy-in. It needs their blessing and their understanding, at least at a high level, of what's being done to protect the organization. This includes taking a look at, as I mentioned earlier, third-party risks, supply chain risks, and making sure that we're holding them to acceptable standards as well. So what does it look like? It means that we will have an answer to the question of, if something breaks, if internet goes down, if an alert comes through at 2 a.m., who's the person that responds? What do they do? This helps us understand if there is a ransomware attack, who decides when or if ransom is going to be paid, and who do they talk to about it. This also will define, when did the board last hear about cyber risk? If it's not getting talked about, it's probably on at least some of their minds, and we want to make sure that we have proactive answers to those questions. So if we're not sure answers to these, this is absolutely where we want to start. All right. The next section is identify. We want to make sure that we know what we have, what it's worth, what threatens it, what sort of an impact could it potentially have on the business. We have to maintain an inventory of all the different hardware, software, data, permissions, all that kind of stuff. Because if we don't have that documented, there's no way we're going to be able to protect it, right? You can't protect what you don't know exists. We want to understand which systems have the most business impact. So yes, the business has 10 servers. Well, we don't necessarily want to put as much urgency and number of resources into protecting an old legacy backup server that's not really doing anything, as we do on the one that's running our e-commerce platform. And if it goes down, we're losing $10,000 an hour, something like that. When we've fully identified the environment, we can map our data flows and the key dependencies. And this leads into utterly critical things that we need to have prepped if we want to start implementing tools like, say, AI tools, for example, right? And we want to be able to track risks. So sometimes our vendors and our suppliers even will alert us and say, hey, the current firewall you're using has a known vulnerability. We don't have a patch just yet, but here's some mitigating things that you can do. Now, if we don't have our environment well identified, you can run into some issues with things like shadow IT. There was one client I had one time where we were running a discovery for it was about a 40-ish person professional services firm. And it was one of the first assessments that they'd ever done. So we pulled all the credit card statements as part of their asset inventory work, and we found 14 different software subscriptions that nobody on the IT side was even aware of. It just turns out that different folks in the organization had decided they needed these tools and they signed up for them under their departments. But 3 of these different software applications were ones that held client PII, personally identifiable information. So it's a liability risk right there on top of a cost risk. One of them was being paid by even an employee that had left the company 6 months earlier, and the auto renewals were still going through. And the only thing that changed was that nobody who currently worked at the company even had access to it. So that alone would have failed an insurance application or a customer due diligence review. None of it was deliberate. It just all sort of accumulated. And it's because we didn't have a solution in place to identify these things. Any questions before I move on to protect here? I when I'm looking at the slides, Eric, I can't see thumbs up or hands up in Teams. So give me a shout out if somebody.
I got you, Ken. I'll let you know if any QA
Awesome.
come in or hands.
Beautiful.
Raised.
So in our protection function here, this is making sure that we put the safeguards in place and that they actually work. It's not enough to just sign off for the tool, but we want to make sure that we are verifying that they actually work. So when we roll out the different portions of our business that are protecting the different aspects, we want to make sure that we've got identity and access management thoroughly in place with principles of least privilege and multi-factor authentication. We want to make sure that when we have these tools in place, they don't just live in a vacuum in a closet, but the entire team needs to be aware and trained on how to actually use these tools and that they exist if it's something that they would be using. We want to make sure all the data is secured, so we're going to encrypt the data, back it up, make sure all the different kinds of data is classified so we avoid potentially leaking out internal intellectual property or payroll information, that kind of stuff. And of course, making sure that we're keeping up with maintenance and patching and secure configuration. Some of you folks might have heard the phrase WannaCry as a virus that had happened in the past, and it would have been completely avoided if businesses were following some best practices for updating and patching and maintenance for their hardware, because a patch to prevent it had come out multiple months before it was actively getting exploited. Multiple months. This is where a lot of the budget and a lot of the time typically goes in an overall holistic cybersecurity solution for a company. It's the endpoints, the firewalls, it's the training. It's not just about buying tools and tossing them in there, throwing money at it, but making sure that everything is configured properly, being used and working together. Moving on to detect. This is making sure we notice when something is wrong. So I've also taught previously for the SANS organization, and they're probably the world's largest cybersecurity certification training body for very high level cybersecurity certifications. And they have a phrase that shows up regularly in a lot of their training that says prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. When we speak on items in cybersecurity, we rarely use absolute terms. And we know that no matter how much time and money you throw at doing your best to protect an environment, um, it's simply not possible to have 100% um, prevention of anything. So we have to be able to identify things when they come in. We've got continuous monitoring of networks, endpoints, and identities that has to happen. We've got anomalies and what they call IOCs, indicators of compromise. These are utterly important to be able to bring them to the surface and to make sure they're documented and triaged, because that was what points to potentially much deeper issues. We want to make sure our detection coverage is actually being tested, not just assumed. So we put in anti-spam software, but are we actually checking to make sure that it's catching things it's supposed to catch? Things like that. And that the alerts are actually going somewhere where someone is paying attention to them and accountable for them, right? This is the area where a lot of clients don't invest enough in. It's understandable you want to make sure that you have the fanciest locks on your doors, but you also want to make sure that you're spending an appropriate amount of money on, movement detection systems and things like that, right? Maybe that's not a very good metaphor, but it gives you the idea. So what they call dwell time is when a system has been breached, when a client has been hacked, and they're living inside your systems, but you don't know it. Average dwell time has come down a lot. It was in something like 6 months when they first started really tracking this. And it's still something like 3 weeks. Eric, I don't know if you've seen more recent numbers on that than I have, but the
Yeah,
average dwell
I think
time
that 2 years ago it was like 60 days. Yeah. And, as the industry has adopted sort of some of these EDR and more advanced telemetry and observability tools, it's they have to act faster, which I think is a sign that customers have been investing in this detect layer.
good, absolutely. But the question then is, okay, let's say someone did get compromised. Who would know in the next few hours? How much damage could they potentially do based off of what appropriate permissions we've given them? All right, the next function here is respond. This is utterly critical. We have to have a written plan. We have to practice it. We call these tabletop exercises, and they don't have to be super fancy or elaborate. There's some interesting gamified things out there, but a 30-minute walkthrough with leadership and IT, even just on paper, it's important to make sure that we know what happens when the internet goes down, what happens when phones goes down, what happens if our systems were to be ransomware. So some of the outcomes that are coming from this would be a written IRP, an instant response plan. Sometimes what they call a BCDR, or a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. It's got to be in writing. It's got to be current. If it's talking about people, systems, locations that don't exist anymore, it's not being kept current, and it needs to have someone responsible for keeping it current. You've got pre-scripted communications. What happens when disaster happens? A lot of times rationality kind of goes out the window, and it's difficult to think. That's human nature. But having something that rational us has written out to be able to refer to and use in advance is so valuable. So valuable. This also defines our containment and eradication steps. So we know what exactly we do to halt the progress of an ongoing attack. And the lessons learned from when these issues happen, they feed back into protect, they feed back into detect, and we make sure and continuously improve these, right? It's an ongoing process. So here's an example of a business email compromise that had happened and destroyed an entire weekend for us at the time. This was a mid-sized professional services firm, and this wasn't with CIO. Like this was from years and years and years ago. But they got hit with a business email compromise on a late Friday afternoon, which that attackers do deliberately because they know people are trying to get out the door and they're not paying the closest attention, right? So a finance employee had wired funds out based off of an email that sure looked like it was coming from the managing partner, but it had been spoofed. It had been faked. They didn't have a written incident response plan, no prearranged forensics retainer, no template for client notification, no idea what their insurance policy actually even required them to do during the first 72 hours. But they spent that whole weekend in just absolute panic, calling their broker, eventually calling the MSP. They reached out to an attorney they'd never even worked with before, trying to figure out what even are their notification obligations to their clients. They eventually contained it, but the cost in legal hours, instant response consulting, and it was like a week and a half before the firm was able to get back to billing properly. It's an order of magnitude even larger than the actual fraud loss itself. So the post-incident tabletops that we run with a client might be 90 minutes, and it would have saved an entire weekend potentially. The last domain here is recover. Okay, bad stuff has happened. How do we recover? How do we get back to business and be able to move forward? So we've got our plans well defined for systems, data, operations, all these different aspects. We want to make sure that the restoration is not just documented but tested practically. Have we actually been able to restore a server from a backup? Have we successfully been able to set the team up with laptops out of a Starbucks if the office was flooded, or a WeWork or something along those lines? We want to make sure that our recovery time and recovery point objectives are actually realistic, and making sure that we have it built in so the post-incident review feeds into the next planning cycle and budget and all that. If we haven't tested a backup, it's not a backup, it's a wish, right? Another story was, I want to say it was about a 25 employee healthcare adjacent organization, and they were running backups on their NAS for years. Everything looked fine. There weren't even any alerts, any failed jobs or anything. So in this case, they were getting green check marks. But the server died on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't even ransomware. It was just a hardware failure, which happens sometimes. Unfortunately, the vendor that they had set it up for them previously had pointed it to back up the wrong volume on the server. So it got the system information, but not their database information. We can recreate the system information. I can download it off the internet. I can boot it off of a disk, but I can't go to a store. I can't go to Microsoft and say, hey, please give me a fresh database. That's our data, and all those backups completely useless. So they had to go back to a much older backup and recreate 3 years worth of data from manual stuff, which they never fully recovered from that. Eric, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I think I'd seen statistics somewhere that said businesses that are unable to fully recover their data, like some percentage of them actually go out of business. It can be
that used to be thrown around like 6 years ago. I never knew if it was true or not, but the intent is just, the intent is there that you need to be able to recover, or you're more dependent on your data for business operations than you may actually think. And so Absolutely. If you can't recover your data, you can't recover operations, and then revenue stops, etc. So
I think absolutely. So we want to guide organizations on a maturity ladder. And this cybersecurity framework really helps get you further up that ladder of maturity. So a lot of the times, again, organically, businesses start because somebody had an idea, right? And you grow according to what you can deal with, who you know, and what the budget allows for it. Understandable. But in that case, if your cybersecurity strategy is going to be just very partial, it's going to be very ad hoc. Well, you move up that maturity ladder there, and now you start to become risk informed. Like, well, we're now aware at least these are issues we have to think about, but it's still not consistently being applied. It's certainly not in a holistic manner. Moving further up the food chain, tier three is repeatable. So now we've got formal policies. So we're doing things the right way each time. We're making sure that these best practices are being applied across the entire organization, not just a particular department. And finally, a much more mature version of an organization is going to make sure that it's a continuous improvement. It's not a pay a one-time project to roll this stuff out. It's continuous monitoring, continuous improvement, making sure that we're getting updated information about what new threats are out there and how to protect against them. So what does this actually change day to day? We want to, as much as possible, not negatively impact a business's workflow, right? A business can be the most secure business in the world, but if it's too difficult to do anything, then it's not a business, right? But it's changing mindset in a lot of different aspects of the business. Instead of saying, oh, I think we're protected, we can very definitively be able to say, like, yes, we know in these domains exactly where we should be, where we're at, where we're planning on going. And if not, why? Instead of when we're presented with new tools from our vendors, just accepting it because it seems like it makes sense and it's what they sold us. That we're actually making choices based off of what is going to close the highest impact gap on the roadmap and how it fits in with the other pieces.
And
Yeah,
just to, because I know we're running short on time here, and you've got a lot more to cover, but what I want to make clear is that the NIST CSF is a framework that we can do a one-time engagement to look through those 7 areas, the governance and the other 6 areas of the wheel, and ensure from the ground up. So it's a methodology essentially in which we are interviewing, we are talking, we are documenting some of the information CIO would already have, some information we need from the organization, and merging the two into that yardstick that you're talking about. So it is a new way for us to engage with a company that involves leadership, their process and operations to a deeper level, and meshing that up against what they often have relied on CIO solutions, so that together we have kind of a holistic security baseline, against standard, documented, and start taking a structured approach as we move up from that reactive to maybe more adaptive as a joint partnership.
100%. And this is what that would basically look like, what you just described. If we work with some clients on starting to build out the CSF framework as part of that journey. 90-day project where we make sure that we're not rushing everyone through it. We're creating a baseline, knocking out some of that low-hanging fruit for some quick wins, and then validating that we're actually doing what we think we should be doing, and everything's in place and working properly. So some of the key takeaways from this presentation is the cybersecurity framework is a tool. It's not just a verdict. You get to decide how far it gets implemented, but it still gives you an objective structure to measure against. You're also already being judged against a framework, even if you're not aware of it. And again, objectivity and being able to answer these questions, this gives you control over the conversation. And maturity beats perfection, right? Chasing after this ideal that is impossible is what gets a lot of engineers miring down the process when the business wants to move forward. So it's much more important that it takes us time to properly move from tier 1 to tier 2 instead of trying to jump straight to tier 4, and then it turns out we didn't implement things well or safely or thoroughly. So if you're interested in following up on some of this, reach out to your account CIO. If you're not currently a client of CIO Solutions, hit us up through the website. Our contact info is in there, and we will happily have that conversation with you guys.
And I know that I know that all things security, the answer is it depends on some of these questions, but give some context around what the process looks like, what the effort level, and who needs to be involved in these things with our customers.
Absolutely.
Because I think in our
Absolutely.
conversations, you can actually make it very lightweight. You can structure the scope to be very evidence-based or just informal based, and depends on where you start. But give some better context on what that looks and feels like.
Yeah, some of that, the it depends portion of it there ties into the existing maturity of the business itself. Because again, it's a little difficult for them to know what they don't know. But depending on the company culture, we can definitely do a much deeper dive or a lighter guidance through it. So depending on the size and structure of the organization, we might need to speak with department heads from all the different departments. We might need to look at some of the different tools that they're using. If they're already a CIO client, then we'll have access to a lot of stuff on the technical side. But there's still client interviews that need to happen. If they're a smaller organization, it may be that our primary contact is the only person we talk to and is able to answer all of these. So it could be anywhere from a few hours of the primary contact's time to dozens of hours across multiple people, depending on the complexity of the organization. There, does that answer the points you wanted there, Eric?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's really important to understand that even though there's effort level, this isn't this is like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. This is not a big HIPAA framework that takes 9 months and is exacting. You basically right size it for where you are today. You're talking about 5 to 10 hours of customer time for most customers that are starting this type of journey, and you're getting the output of a document that really can be shared with leadership or just consumed by the internal folks to know that you're doing all the right things right. And it's holistic rather than just kind of point solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any questions from anyone?
We have a
Or,
question here. Um,
or Jamie, if anyone has emailed
will the
some in or
webinar be
submitted
available
something.
after the presentation? So yeah, I think we do typically record these, and Jamie can chime in with how that gets sent out, but I believe it's sent out in an email for all the participants after the webinar. At least that's how we've historically done it.
Yes, I added a comment as well. So yeah, it'll be sent to everybody that was registered, and then we will also post the recording on our website on ciosolutions.com/events.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments, concerns, things you didn't like? We want to go through continuous improvement as well too. So if you found this valuable, or if you thought there were areas where it would meet your needs better in a slightly different way, please feel free to share those thoughts as well, maybe privately for those ones. But all right. If there's no other questions, we might be able to give you a few more minutes back in your day. But thank you so much for joining us. And this is going to be an ongoing series that we're going to be doing of educational events for not just our internal clients, but for prospective folks too, or just folks that want to learn. There's absolutely no obligation to attend. These are completely free. So we got one coming up May 29th on strengthening your compliance programs, HIPAA and other common security frameworks.
Cool. Thank you, Ken.
Absolutely.
Thanks everyone for attending, and yeah, any feedback is welcomed, and we tend to gear these things towards what our clients want to hear about, whether that's more in depth or less in depth. So please give us all your feedback, and we'll adjust accordingly.
All right, folks. Have a great day.